It's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Sometime after the fall of Chicago, a former air traffic controller abandons the safety of his tower at O'Hare and steps back into a city that devours the unprepared. This time, survival isn't about holding out, it's about daring to move forward. Zombie Outbreak, Chicago O'Hare International Airport, by Augustus Cordoba. Part 1. Well, I never figured I'd end up perched above a dead city staring out over a world that doesn't care about clocks anymore. No departures, no arrivals, no schedules barking through headsets. But that's where I've been for the last 2 months, holed up in the control tower at O'Hare International Airport, a relic from another life, back when the world still moved around. The glass that once looked down on neat lines of aircraft taxiing in perfect choreography now faces cracked runways splitting open like old scars. It didn't take long for weeds to push through the asphalt. The occasional body drifts across the tarmac now, not walking, not searching, just wandering. Airports used to hum 24 hours a day, and now it's the silence that hangs over the airfield like wet concrete. Every gust that slams the tower windows feels like the world reminding me how empty it's become. My name's Dan Mercer, 42. I spent nearly 20 years as an air traffic controller. Chances are, if you ever passed through Chicago, I was one of the calm, invisible voices guiding your pilot down through bad weather and crowded airspace. I lived for the structure of my day-to-day life, the tight coordination, the precision. Aviation was like an orchestra to me. And as a team, we kept it in precise rhythm. Then, the outbreak tore the sheet music in half. Flights were grounded, terminals clogged with stranded passengers. The great artery of the Midwest just stopped. We'd heard something had hit NYC. JFK and LaGuardia grounded just like that. Threats to quarantine Manhattan and the Bronx, followed by Queens and Brooklyn. When the first reports filtered in from downtown Chicago, telling of people collapsing in the streets, then getting back up meaner than before, we assumed it would just burn out. Contained, managed. The Chicago PD had sealed off city blocks, so we were told. The Illinois National Guard rolled in with Humvees and checkpoints. News anchors played their part, smiling a little too much and promising us that everything was under control. Then the calls started bleeding through the secure aviation channels. Pilots refusing to taxi to gates. Captains demanding diversions away from Chicago airspace. Airlines grounding entire fleets across the Midwest. And nothing inbound from New York or LA, although there were rumors that trains were still running. I remember the moment it shifted. A Delta crew calling in, their voices stern, saying a passenger had attacked a flight attendant at 30,000 feet. Not drunk, not panicked. No, this was something else. That's when I knew this wasn't just bad turbulence. This was full-scale collapse. Within hours, O'Hare had turned into a cage. Thousands of people were trapped between security lines, customs, and locked gates. Families clutching luggage, businessmen screaming into dead phones, flight crews waiting for orders that never came. TSA and airport police were overwhelmed before they even understood what they were fighting. When the first infected made it into Terminal 3, it spread like a fuse racing through dry grass. I watched it unfold on the monitors from the tower. Crowds breaking apart, carry-on scattered, shoes abandoned mid-stride. The stampede with nowhere to go. Damn, it's hard to believe that was only 2 months ago. Now the airport is becoming a monument to rust. Jet bridges hang useless and skeletal. Most of the aircraft still sit in long, silent rows. Their white fuselages streak brown with the onset of corrosion. The tails throw long shadows when the sun drops low. Some were gutted for fuel and parts in the early weeks. Others are sealed coffins. And trust me when I tell you, I don't go near those. No, I stay in the tower. It's the only place that still feels like command. Nearly 300 feet up, with narrow stairwells that can be defended by one man with enough nerve. The glass walls give me a full sweep of the airfield. Some of the old ATC consoles still flicker to life when I hook them to car batteries. Weeks back, I stripped solar panels from a maintenance hangar and dragged them up piece by piece. With enough rewiring, I even managed to get a fridge humming, a few radios crackling, and the tower lights burning again. At night, that light turns the tower into a lone beacon in a sea of dark. Sometimes I dim it, worried it'll draw the wrong kind of attention. Other nights, though, when the silence presses in too hard, I let it blaze, just to prove to myself I'm not another corpse rotting between runways. On my own now, but I wasn't at first. There were 4 of us who'd made it up here when everything fell apart. Mary Ann Smith, 30, an ER nurse from Evanston in Cook County, just north of Chicago. She'd been waiting for her brother's flight when the terminals erupted. And there was Hector Ramirez, a former army mechanic who worked cargo handling on site, tough and practical with steady hands. Then there was Kevin Williams, a college kid fresh off a semester abroad, dropped straight into hell when he'd landed. Well, we'd somehow sealed the tower together, barricaded the doors, boarded the lower windows, rigged rain collectors across the roof. For a while it felt impossible, like we might just outlast it. But, well, the truth is survival chews at people, in different speeds and different ways. Kevin was the first to break. Lasted about 4 weeks with us, then he decided he'd rather take his chances on the ground. Well, Kevin was sure he could eventually make it to Wyoming, where his brother lived in a small town called Sheridan. He convinced himself they'd be there, safe behind some invisible line the chaos hadn't crossed. He packed light, took one of the service roads out past the perimeter, and disappeared into the dead sprawl beyond the airport. We never saw him again. Mary Ann held on longer, more than a month, long enough for winter to sink its teeth in. January hit us like a hammer. She got pneumonia, without antibiotics, without a hospital, without anything but blankets and boiled water. It was a slow execution. She drowned in her own lungs while the snow piled up along the runways. Hector and I buried her at the edge of the tarmac. We hauled stones from an old landscaping supply truck and built a low, crude mound over the frozen ground. No marker, just rock and silent prayers. Hector himself only lasted another week or so. We were sweeping the cargo tunnels under Terminal 5 when part of the ceiling gave way behind us. The collapse forced us down a maintenance corridor neither of us liked the look of. It was walking point. 1 second it was clear. The next, something peeled itself out of the shadows. It came at him low and fast. He got his knife up. Remembered the sound. Steel hitting bone, breath turning into a snarl. But there were more of them tucked back in the dark. Too many. He went down fighting, and I ran because if I hadn't, we'd both be bones in that tunnel. I barely made it back to the tower. And so now, it's just me. The tower is my fortress and my cage. From up there, I've charted every inch of the airport grounds. Safest paths between terminals, hangars, maintenance sheds. I know which stairwells creak, which doors jam, which parking garages echo too much. In the far distance, the Chicago skyline still glitters on clear nights. The Willis Tower stands stubborn and tall, though half its windows are now blown out. When the wind shifts, I swear I can hear the city breathe. Faint screams, sometimes the deep roar of a fire catching hold of something big. I try not to picture how many people might still be out there alive, trapped, hiding, waiting for rescue that isn't coming. But routine, that's what keeps me sane. Every morning I descend the narrow tower stairs, check the barricades, walk the perimeter near the base. I comb through abandoned baggage carts and rusting airport vehicles for anything worth taking. Fuel's almost gone, but I've learned to siphon it slowly and carefully. The food's worse. The vending machines were emptied a while ago. Restaurants and terminal kitchens only offered so much before they turned into rat nests and decay. And now, it's dry packets, dented cans, stale crackers. If I'm lucky, I snare a rabbit or drop a bird that strays too close. The airport, left alone, has already started to turn feral. Grass ripping through cracks in the runway, small animals reclaiming the margins. It reminds me of stretches of Illinois backcountry, where nature doesn't ask permission to take things back. Weapons were never part of my old life, but now they're non-negotiable. Early on, I pulled a Remington 870 from an airport police cruiser, along with a Glock 22 and a handful of magazines. Now, ammo doesn't grow back, so I make sure I conserve it. Emergencies only. Most days I carry a fire axe I tore off of a terminal wall and a crowbar Hector swore by. Quiet and reliable. No muzzle flash to advertise my position. Every so often people pass through. Not the infected, no, the living. Survivors, scavengers. Sometimes they're organized, sometimes just desperate. A few days back, a convoy of pickup trucks rolled along the outer perimeter road. Heavily armed. No flags, no insignia. Just hard faces looking for anything they could strip and carry. They cracked open cargo hangars, looted what they wanted, and were gone in less than 48 hours. I stayed dark in the tower, lights out, watching. Not every human is safer than the dead. Far from it. The infected still drift through the terminals and parking garages. Sometimes they spill onto the runways in loose clusters. Well, they're not sprinters, not monsters from a movie, but they don't quit, and they're always more than you think. Most of them still wear scraps of who they used to be. Torn business suits, faded jeans, flight attendant uniforms stiff with grime. Every now and then I recognize a face from an old ID badge I'd scavenged. And you know what? That's the part that sticks. Knowing I might have passed them once in a terminal, headset on, guiding their plane in. I track time however I can. Old office calendars help, though the days tend to blur if I'm not careful. What really anchors me is writing. I keep journals, weather reports, supply logs, sightings. I write it all down. Maybe someone will find them someday. Someone who lives long enough to understand how this place fell apart. Maybe they'll learn something from it. Or maybe they'll just know that we fought. Last week, something changed. For the first time in ages, my old aviation radio caught a signal on the emergency band. At first, I thought it was just static clawing at the speaker. Then I heard it, a voice. Weak, distorted, but definitely a real live human.
Sector 45, evacuation. Repeat. Sector 45.
I didn't move. I just stood there in the dim light of the tower listening. The transmission faded almost as soon as it came through. I've tried raising it every night since, but nothing. Sector 45. I dug through old maps, traced old cargo zones and perimeter grids. If I'm right, it could point to one of the freight areas near Bensonville, just outside the airport boundary. Damn, it's a gamble. But the idea that there might be organized survivors out there, not just drifters and raiders, has been chewing at me ever since this all began. And for the first time in a long while, the tower feels less like safety, more like a trap. For 2 months, basically, I hadn't budged. Kept my head down, stayed out of the city, avoided risks that didn't need taking. The tower was enough. High ground, clear sightlines, a defensible choke point. Now, in a world gone feral, that truly mattered. But lately, if I'm honest, something's been shifting under my skin. Maybe the tower won't be my grave. Maybe I won't end up another pile of bones like Marianne and Hector, bleaching in the ruins of a place that once pulsed with movement and connection. Or maybe I will. Maybe this glass box will be my coffin, perched above cracked runways and slowly rusting aircraft. Or maybe, I'll catch that signal again. Maybe I'll track it down and find proof that the world isn't as dead as it looks. For now, I sit at the console, shotgun resting on my lap, staring out over the airfield and waiting for the static to split open. Oh, it's the waiting that eats at you. Not hunger, not fear. No, the silence. Oh, every night I work the radio dial, slowly and deliberately, sweeping through frequencies that used to be clogged with chatter. Pilots asking for clearance, ground crews calling in delays, controllers like me juggling call signs and altitudes like circus knives. Now it's just hiss and dead air. Sometimes I swear I hear voices buried in the noise, fragments, half-formed words clawing their way through the static. But when I replay the recordings, there's nothing there. Just interference and my own desperation echoing back at me. Except that one time.
Sector 45, evacuation. Repeat, Sector 45.
It cut through clean enough to freeze me in place. And then it was gone. It's been living in my head ever since. Part 2. O'Hare ran on sectors, numbered zones for cargo, maintenance, perimeter security. I used to know them pretty well. Had to check this one, though. Sector 45 lines up with the old FedEx and UPS cargo warehouses on the northwest side, near Bensonville. From the tower, that's just under 2 miles. But in this world, 2 miles might as well be 20. Between here and there, open runways, yawning hangars, surface tunnels that swallow light. I've studied them through binoculars, filled journals with notes. Where clusters of infected gather, which service roads stay mostly clear, where shadows seem to breed movement. The airport's a maze of concrete and steel. Every route is a coin toss. For days, I went back and forth. Leave the tower and I give up the one advantage that kept me breathing. Stay, and I rot here, waiting for a voice that might never return. In the end, the decision wasn't logical. It was instinct. When you've been alone long enough, the idea of other people, even strangers, pulls at something deep and animalistic. It's not hope, not exactly. Something older than that. Like the way you feel the forest closing in when you're hiking alone at dusk, miles from a trailhead. You start craving the sound of another human voice just to prove you're still part of the species. Well, preparation came first. I went over my gear the way I used to scan radar screens, focused and methodical. The Remington 870 got stripped, cleaned, and oiled. I checked the barrel, tested the action. 18 shells left, stacked inside an old airline catering box. Well, I counted them twice. The Glock had 15 rounds, 2 extra magazines taped together for a fast reload. Ammo's currency now. Finite, but for this run, I allowed myself this weight. The fire axe rode across my back. Hector's crowbar hung at my side, metal worn smooth where his hands used to grip it. Clothes next. 2 shirts under a heavy cargo jacket, jeans reinforced with duct tape along the thighs, gloves, steel-toed boots, not armor exactly, but enough layers to buy me a second if something grabbed me. I packed light beyond that. A canvas messenger bag, a few cans of food, stainless steel water bottle, compact medkits, hand-cranked flashlight. I slid in a folded airport schematic. I'd marked up in red ink the safe lanes, the danger zones, and the blind corners. In my pocket a flare gun with 2 rounds. Not for fighting, for signaling. If Sector 45 turned out to be real, that is. The heaviest thing I carried was a portable radio receiver wired into a jury-rigged battery pack. If I could get closer to the source, maybe the transmission would sharpen. Maybe it would sound less like a ghost. The night before I left, I sat inside the glass dome of the tower and watched the city's faint glow on the horizon. Chicago was a black mass under the stars, broken now and then by an orange flare when something caught fire. Reminded me of distant brush fires I'd seen in the hills of Illinois, bright blooms of light swallowed by dark woods. I thought about Marianne, about Hector, about Kevin walking west toward Wyoming with too much hope and not enough ammunition. Damn, I wondered if he'd ever made it, if his brother was still alive to open a door and pull him inside. Sadly, I doubted it, but I held on to the possibility anyway. I didn't sleep much that night, and at dawn I moved. The first light spilled across the runways as I descended the tower stairs. My boots thudded against metal steps, the echo chasing me down the narrow shaft. The air at ground level smelled like old jet fuel and rusted steel. and the runway stretched out ahead me like dried riverbeds, cracked, overgrown, flanked by rows of silent aircraft baking in the pale morning light. I tightened my grip on the shotgun and stepped off the base of the tower. 2 miles to Sector 45. 2 miles through a graveyard. Well, I kept to the margins. Out in the open, you're exposed, a speck against miles of cracked concrete. So I hugged the service roads, cut between maintenance sheds, slipped through access corridors whenever I could. Same principle as moving through thick timber. Use whatever cover the land gives you. But the first problem came fast. A catering truck sat abandoned near a taxiway, its rear doors hanging open. Around it drifted a cluster of infected, at least 12 by my count through the binoculars. They circled the vehicle in slow, useless loops, like muscle memory still had them on shift. A few wore shredded airline catering uniforms, faded logos barely visible under the grime. Well, I didn't test them. No, I peeled off, crouching low behind a chain of baggage carts, easing each step down like it was crossing brittle ice. Sound travels out here, too far and too clean. One-drop shell casing can echo like a rifle shot in the emptiness. By mid-morning, I'd reached the edge of Terminal 2. The glass front had blown out, the concourse choked with debris and overturned kiosks. Sunlight spilled through the gaps, lighting up dust and old footprints like a crime scene. I didn't go inside. No, I'd learned by now that terminals are potential death traps. Blind corners, escalators, stairwells. Too many angles for something to come at you. Instead, I found an access hatch and slipped into the underground service tunnels that run parallel to the terminals. Those tunnels used to carry baggage carts and electricity utility vehicles, a hidden circulatory system beneath the airport. When everything fell apart, they turned into escape routes, and then choke points for the unlucky ones. The walls still tell the story. Spray-painted arrows pointing nowhere. Brown-black stains on the concrete. Shoes kicked off mid-run. Abandoned luggage split open and gutted. In our new world order, the underground is a trade-off. You're invisible from above, but down there the sound bounces around. Breath ricochets, and if you round a corner into a cluster, there's no open field to sprint across, just walls and teeth. I kept the flashlight low in my left hand, my beam tightened to a narrow one. Every 30 steps I stopped and listened. Damn, my own breathing sounded like a freight train in my skull. After nearly an hour, I climbed out near the United hangars. The structures rose ahead of me, massive and echoing, like rusted cathedrals. Their doors hung half open, revealing skeletal maintenance rigs and grounded aircraft stripped for parts. I paused in the shadow of a fuel truck, scanning all around me. 2 infected were wandering near the hangar entrance. One dragged a ruined leg, its hip twisted unnaturally, but it still moved with stubborn intent. The other wore the remains of a neon safety vest, strips of fluorescent fabric fluttering in the breeze. I gave them plenty of space, cutting wide across a fractured service road. By noon, I'd reached the northwestern perimeter, the old FedEx cargo zone. This place used to thrum with forklifts and delivery trucks, parcels flowing in and out like arteries carrying blood. Now it sat under a lid of silence. Crows had claimed the rooftops, their calls sharp and ugly against the still air. I ducked behind a concrete barrier and pulled out the portable radio. The battery pack hummed as I powered it on. Static flooded the speaker. And then, faint but unmistakable, a voice.
Sector 45. Survivors, request. Repeat, request. Immediate assistance.
The words were torn apart by interference, but they were real, stronger than before, closer. A chill ran straight through me. I twisted the dial, trying to lock onto it, but the signal thinned and vanished back into white noise. Still, it was enough. Someone was broadcasting from here. Ahead of me, the cargo buildings lined up in dull metal rows. Most were sealed tight, doors locked or welded, but one wasn't. Warehouse 45A stood slightly open. The delivery truck jammed crooked in front of the entrance like it'd been abandoned mid-unload. If there were survivors sending that signal, that was my bet. I moved in slow, sweeping arcs, checking shadows, scanning roof lines. The lot was cluttered with crates. Some were split open, cardboard sagging, packages rotted to pulp. My boots crunched over broken glass despite my best effort to stay quiet. At the doorway I paused and listened. Nothing inside but wind slipping through the gap. So I edged in, my shotgun raised. Oof, the air smelled like mildew and old paper. Sunlight cut through holes in the roof, thin beams slicing across rows of metal shelving stacked with forgotten parcels. The whole place felt suspended in time. Then I saw it. A camp set up near the center of the warehouse. Folding chairs arranged in a loose circle. A small propane stove. Bedrolls spread over flattened cardboard. Empty cans stacked neatly in one corner. On a folding table sat a jerry-rigged radio transmitter wired into a car battery. Didn't look like it was looted. Looked like it was lived in. So I stepped closer. That's when I heard it. A faint scrape from behind the shelving. I swung the shotgun toward the sound, my finger tightening on the trigger. Oh, my pulse slammed into my ears. A man stepped out of the shadows. Not infected. He raised his hands slowly, his palms open. He was thin, his beard overgrown, and his cheeks hollowed out, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "Don't shoot," he said. His voice shook, but it held. "You heard the broadcast, didn't you?" I kept the barrel trained on his chest. The camp suggested more than one occupant. One man couldn't have kept this stocked, not with what I saw around me. If there were others, they were either hidden or gone. He lowered his hands inch by inch when he saw I wasn't firing. Up close, he looked wrecked. Skin pulled tight over bone, clothes stiff with old sweat and dirt. He wore an airline-issued parka, a worn United Airlines patch still clinging to the sleeve, probably scavenged from somewhere in the chaos. His gaze flicked from me to the warehouse entrance and then back again, measuring the distance, weighing his options. The kind of constant calculation you see in someone who's lived too long with danger breathing down their neck. I've seen that same wired edge in hunters deep in the Illinois backcountry, men who know one wrong step in the forest can cost them everything. "You're not infected," he said at last, his voice rough but steady. Then he let out a slow breath. "That makes you rarer than gold out here." I didn't respond. Talking too soon can get you killed. I didn't know him, didn't know what he'd do if I lowered the barrel another inch, so I let the quiet stretch out between us and kept studying the room. The propane stove wasn't cold. The metal was still scorched from recent heat, the canister only half drained. The bedrolls weren't layered in dust either. 3 of them laid out across flattened cardboard, creased and used. 3. And the stack of empty cans in the corner? That wasn't one man rationing alone. That was a group that had lasted a while. 4 people at least, maybe more. "Where are the others?" I asked. His jaw flexed. He looked at the concrete floor like it had an answer written on it. "Gone," he said in a low voice. "Not in one shot, but close enough." He rubbed a hand over his beard. "We were 6 when this started. Warehouse guys, drivers, people stranded here when everything went to hell. We turned this place into something solid for a while. Set up supply runs into the city. Built a perimeter, rotations. We even had a schedule." A bitter half smile flickered and died. "Yeah, that broadcast you heard, that was us. Trying to reach anyone still breathing." Then he trailed off and sighed deeply. Then, one by one. I still didn't lower the shotgun. "Gone, how?" I pressed. "Dead or, walked?" His eyes snapped back to mine then. Both. He let out a slow breath. A couple didn't make it back from the runs. One thought he'd survive better solo. Another got sloppy. He couldn't stop it in time. Oh, his voice cracked at that, but he pushed through it. A couple of weeks ago, the last 3 went south. Said they picked up a signal like the one you heard. Figured they'd check it out. He shook his head. They never came back. I've been here since, keeping the radio hot, waiting. Waiting. I knew that word too well. Groups don't last long unless they've got discipline and luck. Luck's been in short supply for a long time now. Still, the fact they built a transmitter, run coordinated broadcasts, well, that set them apart from the drifters I'd seen moving like ghosts through the terminals. He got the doubt in my face then. Name's Harris, he said after a beat. Arthur Harris. Ground services before this. Cargo handling, maintenance support. I know these warehouses inside out. And a dry, humorless chuckle escaped him. Probably better than anyone still alive. Then he waited. Dan, I said. Nothing more. Names are expensive, and I wasn't going to give any more than I had to. He nodded like that was enough. That signal's still running because I keep it running, he said, gesturing to the transmitter. Figured maybe I'd pull in someone like you. Someone not stupid enough to charge straight into the city. I eased my shotgun down, but still didn't let it hang loose. You, wanted company, I said. Well, now what? His shoulders sagged under the weight of the question. Well, plan was to wait for the others, he admitted. But I'm not lying to myself anymore. They're not coming back. He glanced at the dwindling supplies. Oh, food's almost gone. Been thinking about moving, but alone? He shook his head at that. Doesn't matter how careful you are. Alone catches up to you. Always does. He studied me hard. You got somewhere? He asked. You don't last this long roaming open ground. Again, I didn't answer right away. Telling him about the tower meant exposing the one advantage I had. He stayed safe because no one knew it was occupied. But there was something in his voice. Not just desperation, no. Calculation, but not deceit. And if he was telling the truth, then this warehouse was already a dead end for him. I've managed, I said at last. Up in the tower, airfield side. His eyes widened. The tower? He stared at me like I said I was living in a lighthouse in the middle of a storm. Are you serious? That thing's been sitting up there this whole time. God, I figured it would have been overrun in the first month. I shook my head. Too high, too narrow. You lock it down right, nothing gets far in. Jeez, he muttered. That's like holding up on a fire tower in the middle of the woods. He let out a breath. Like an old ranger post. High ground, clean lines of sight. I've been there since the start, I said. For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not relief exactly, but there was a flicker, a spark. And you've done better than we did, he said quietly. We thought these warehouses were a fortress. All we really built was a trap. Too many doors, too much space. Nowhere to choke the flow. The wind then whistled through the broken roof panels overhead. It was a thin, lonely sound. We stood there listening to it for a while. And finally Harris stepped over to the transmitter. He flipped the switch. The low hum died instantly. He unhooked the cables from the battery with steady hands. No point keeping it alive now, he said. If anyone else was going to answer, they would have done so. The warehouse fell into a deeper silence. Well, just the two of us then. Part 3. The rest of the day moved by under a thin layer of mutual distrust. Nonetheless, we worked side by side in the warehouse. Not as friends, not as enemies, just two men measuring each other while we stripped the place for whatever it still had to give. I found a half case of bottled water shoved under a tarp behind a stack of warped pallets. Harris dug up a crate of expired protein bars. Stale, chalky, but edible. Between the two of us, we scraped together enough supplies to make the trip back worthwhile. He showed me a storage room near the rear loading docks. Tools, spare fuel cans, cores of extension cord. I took what I could carry without slowing myself to a crawl and marked the heavier gear in my notebook. If we came back, I wanted to know exactly where to look. By the time the lights started draining out of the sky, we had to decide. Stay the night in the warehouse or risk the open air after dark. Now, I don't move across open ground once the sun's down, not unless I have no other choice. Visibility drops, shadows stretch. The infected drift more freely when the world goes quiet. Well, we stayed. Dragged crates across the doors, killed the stove, took up position near the radio table. No fire, no extra noise. I lay on my bedroll with the shotgun within reach, listening to Harris breathe across from me. Steady but not relaxed, never relaxed. Nobody sleeps clean in a place like that. Truth be known, sleep didn't come for me at all. My head kept circling what he told me. If his group had picked up another signal deeper in the city, that meant there were broadcasts beyond the airport perimeter. Something organized, something structured, not just random static. If that was true, then the world wasn't entirely mute. At some point I drifted into a shallow half-sleep, jerking awake at every creak in the rafters, every groan of wind slipping through torn roof panels. We moved at first light. Well, the trip back was a lot slower. Extra weight on our backs, extra eyes to account for. Harris wasn't careless, but he wasn't conditioned to the rhythm I'd built over 2 months alone. He stepped a little too hard over debris, hesitated too long in exposed stretches. More than once I had to snap a hand up and freeze him when shapes shifted in the distance. He learned fast, though. By late afternoon, the tower came into view. Harris stopped walking. The glass dome caught the sun, flashing faintly above the endless spread of cracked runways. It stood there like a lone fire lookout above a burned forest. "You've really been living up there?" he muttered, shaking his head. "All this time, we never even looked." Inside, I guided him through the base level, past reinforced doors and layered barricades, up the narrow stairwell, one choke point at a time. I showed him where the doors locked, where I'd rigged alarms, where I'd stacked fallback supplies. When we reached the top and the skyline rolled into view through the full circle of glass, he went quiet. Chicago's silhouette sat on the horizon, dark and jagged. "Wow, this beats anything we built," he said finally. It felt strange having another presence up there, another set of footsteps on metal stairs, another voice cutting through the silence. I'd grown used to solitude the way you get used to cold water. You stop fighting it after a while. But as night settled and we unpacked what we'd salvaged, I noticed something. The silence wasn't lighter, just less absolute. We heated canned beans on my small camping stove. The flame hissed softly in the dim control room. Harris talked while we ate. He told me about the group he'd lost, about a supposed safe zone near the lakefront, organized survivors, leadership supplies, a fortified perimeter. The last transmission they caught from that direction had been broken and weak, but convincing enough to spark hope. That hope was what had sent people south. He'd stay behind to keep the broadcast running, to guard their base. They had never come back. As he spoke, I weighed this up. I'd sworn I wouldn't enter the city. Too dense, too many infected, too many collapsed structures and blind corridors. It's like pushing deep into the backcountry without a map or weather forecast, only a lot worse. Concrete instead of trees, no trails and no mercy. But if there really was a structured survivor group out there, ignoring it meant choosing isolation until something finally broke my luck. When he'd finished, he looked straight at me. "Hey man, you've made it this long because you're careful," he said. "That's why you're still breathing. But, hey, caution isn't a strategy forever. Supplies dry up, equipment fails, towers fall. He glanced around at the reinforced doors, the solar rig, the mapped routes. If there are real survivors out there, organized ones, we need to find them. Otherwise, we're just counting down to, Well, I didn't answer. His words dug into places that I'd tried to seal off. For 2 months, those thoughts were mine alone. Now they had a second voice. That night, I lay awake, listening to the faint hum of the solar regulator and the occasional rattle of wind against the dome's glass panes. Harris slept in the corner where Kevin's bedroll used to be. His breathing was heavy and uneven. I stared at the ceiling. Truth is, he wasn't wrong. The tower had kept me alive. I'd reinforced doors, rationed supplies, memorized every route across the airfield. But nothing like this lasts forever. Time chews through steel and concrete the same way it takes down trees in the forest. One bad break, one mistake, one unlucky encounter, and it all unravels. Each night the city sits on the horizon, a dark outline against the sky. For ages I'd told myself there was nothing there worth risking my life for. Now I wasn't so sure. Maybe I hadn't just been hiding from danger. No, maybe I'd been hiding from the possibility that something, or someone, might still be worth stepping into it for. Morning broke cold and thin over the skyline, the kind of pale Illinois light that seeps through and makes everything look abandoned. I was up before the sun cleared the ridgeline. Habit ran my body before my mind caught up, checking the barricade we'd rigged across the fire tower stairwell, testing each bolt and brace, then climbing to the roof to inspect the rain barrels and the tarps that funneled water into them. After that, I crouched by the battery bank and watched the charge meter like it was a pulse. Harris shadowed me the whole time. Didn't say much, just observed. The way a man does when he's trying to figure out how someone else managed not to die out here. Breakfast was a sleeve of stale crackers and a dented can of fruit cocktail we split with a pocket knife. We sat on opposite sides of the folding table. We circled the subject we'd both been thinking about. Look, if there really is a group, I said finally, if your people weren't chasing smoke in the wind, then getting to them isn't enough. We need a way in and a way back, alive. Harris nodded once. Look, charging in blind is how we get buried. We need to scout it first, identify safe stops, places to hole up if it goes bad. He bent over the rough map I'd pieced together from ranger stations and old tourist brochures. His finger traced from our tower through logging roads, past abandoned campgrounds, down toward the wider highways that eventually cut south. He tapped a few intersections where old state routes narrowed between rock walls and forest. Choke points, he muttered. Dead cars, fallen trees. Noise would echo like a gunshot in a canyon. Better to cut through side roads, move slow, watch the ridgelines. As he talked, I studied him differently than before. Harris wasn't military, didn't move like it, but he'd learned the hard way. There was calculation in him. He didn't carry that reckless edge Kevin had had, back when this nightmare had started, and he wasn't hollowed out like Hector had become toward the end. Harris still had direction. Out here, purpose was rarer than ammo. Over the next few days, we settled into something like a system. He reinforced weak spots in the tower's defenses I'd stopped noticing weeks ago, tightened wire, replaced rotting boards, rebalanced the counterweight on the latch. He combed through the old maintenance sheds scattered along the Forest Service Road and came back with scavenged prizes. Spare batteries, duct tape, hand tools, even a length of copper wire we didn't know we needed until we did. With 2 men working, the tower stopped feeling like a desperate perch in the trees and started to resemble an outpost. At night we leaned over maps by lantern light, marking potential routes with a grease pencil, arguing quietly over risk versus reward while wind scraped across the steel supports outside. But, well, doubt stayed with me. The forest I knew, every trailhead, every hunting blind. The way sound traveled through the valleys. Out there beyond the tree line, past the small Illinois towns swallowed by rotten silence, the unknown multiplied with every mile. I'd seen what the infected looked like in tight quarters, what they did when cornered. And that was in open woodland. Now, in clustered neighborhoods or industrial zones, the numbers alone would be a different beast. And then there were the people. Harris's group had gone out and never come back. That detail clung to me like damp clothes. Either the infected had taken them, or something else had. Out here, desperation made its own predators. On the 5th morning, after I dragged him into this tower half dead, we stood on the roof platform. The sky was clean and sharp. Through binoculars, I scanned the distant clearings where a logging camp used to be, the skeletal frames of warehouses near the old highway cut, the strip of asphalt that once led tourists deeper into the forested areas. Nothing moved, which meant, well, nothing at all. The silence pressed down on us as thick as fog. "We're not ready," I said at last. "Not with what we've got. A run that far could stretch into days if we had trouble, weeks if we're forced off route. And we need stockpiles." Impatience flickered in his eyes, but he didn't argue. "Well, then we build reserves now," he said. "Hit the outer ranger stations, the employee cabins. Most scavengers think the forest's been picked clean, or worse. Well, that works for us." So we shifted gears. Instead of hiding and waiting, we started hunting supplies on purpose. We pushed further along surface roads that I'd avoided previously, slipping between trees, keeping low. Alone, I used to move like smoke, fast and silent, gone before anything noticed. With two, we could take risks. One watched while the other pried doors open. One covered angles. We carried more back. First haul, a case of bottled water from a collapsed campground store. Labels faded but sealed tight. Second, first aid kit stripped from a locked cabinet in an abandoned ranger office. The third run, though, that nearly ended us. We'd pushed into the lower level of an old visitor center near the edge of the forest boundary. Concrete walls sweating moisture, air thick and stale. We were looking for staff lockers, anything left behind in the early panic. The stairwell down was black as a well. We just stepped onto the landing when the sound reached us. A wet shuffle, then another, echoing upward from the darkness below. Too many of them, at least a dozen. They emerged slow at first, shapes dragging themselves up the steps. Then their heads tilted back in unison, like something had pulled their strings. They saw us at the same time. Well, the noise they made wasn't human anymore. It scraped out of them, a guttural chorus that hit the spine and froze the blood. Harris tightened his grip on the crowbar, his knuckles white. I brought the shotgun up to my shoulder and aimed into the dark. The first shot detonated in that concrete throat like a summer storm rolling off Lake Michigan. The blast punched my ears flat. The recoil slammed through my shoulders, and the muzzle flash turned the stairwell white for half a heartbeat. When my vision snapped back, they were still coming. Too many of them. We stumbled backward through the door we'd forced open minutes earlier, our boots skidding on grit. Harris nearly went down. I grabbed his jacket and hauled him through as the infected lunged for us, fingers clawing at air. We slammed the steel door shut and threw our weight against it. A second later, they hit. The frame shuddered, fists pounded, teeth scraped metal. Their snarls ricocheted up the concrete shaft, chasing us even after we'd bolted back toward daylight. By the time we made it up to the tower, our lungs were burning, and Chicago felt smaller and further away than ever. That night we sat in the control room above O'Hare, the dead runway stretching out beneath us like pale scars. No lights, no aircraft, just wind sliding across empty tarmac. Harris broke the silence first. "Man, that was one stairwell," he said quietly. "Picture a whole street downtown." Neither of us replied, and neither of us slept. Still, the supply runs had paid off. Slowly the tower stopped feeling like a last stand and started to resemble a stockpile. Canned food stacked in neat rows, cases of water tucked against the wall, batteries sorted and labeled, first aid kits raided from abandoned offices and repacked for quick grabs. Harris even got one of the old airport maintenance trucks running. The thing had been rotting near a hangar, hood half open like it had given up. We hotwired it, tore apart the ignition, coaxed the engine back from the grave with patience and stubbornness. When it finally coughed to life, the sound rolled across the airfield like an alarm. Now, fuel was another story. We siphoned off what we could from vehicles left to bake in the Illinois sun. Wasn't much, but, rationed carefully, might take us part way toward the city if we chose to gamble on wheels instead of boots. The truck was both promise and threat. Well, speed meant fewer hours exposed on Chicago streets, but an engine echoed between buildings. It announced you, to the infected, and to anyone else still breathing. Weeks blurred together in preparation. The tower, once my lonely perch over a dead airport, hummed again with intent. Radios checked, maps updated, routes debated. For the first time in these long months, I felt there might be something beyond mere survival. But the choice hung over us heavier each passing day. Leave, and we bet everything on the idea that Harris's people were still alive somewhere beyond the loop. Stay, and we slowly eat through what we'd built, waiting for rust, rot, or numbers to win. One evening the sun bled red behind the Chicago skyline, skyscrapers standing like blackened teeth against the horizon. Harris lowered the binoculars with deliberate care. "We've done all we can here," he said. "Food, fuel, routes. You know staying won't save us. If that broadcast was real, they're our only shot at something better than rotting in this tower. And if it wasn't real," he shrugged, "at least we'll know. At least we didn't just sit here waiting to die." I didn't answer right away. I watched the last light drain from the city. For those 2 months, my world ended at the airport fence line. Beyond it was memory. Traffic on the Kennedy Expressway, crowds on Michigan Avenue, now replaced by silence and the threat of teeth. For the first time, I looked at that horizon without pure dread, though. "Okay, we avoid the interstates," I said finally. "No I-90, no I-94. Too exposed. Too many choke points. We take side streets, rail lines, service roads. And we mark fallback spots every few miles. If it goes bad, we don't push forward just to prove a point. We live first, move second." Harris's expression hardened into something close to satisfaction. "Well, then we start plotting tonight." He spread the maps across the console and dragged a stubby pencil across paper. And I realized the truth. The decision had already been made. The tower was not going to be my grave. Chicago was calling us back into its bones. Part 4. The days before departure were tight with urgency. Every ounce mattered, every tool questioned. Harris pushed for light packs, but I argued for redundancy. Experience had taught me the one item you leave behind is the one that keeps you alive. And so we compromised. Each of us would carry a backpack, food, water, medical gear. The truck would haul the heavy load. Spare fuel, blankets, tools, extra batteries for the lanterns. We both knew the vehicle might die before we cleared the northwest side. But even 50 miles gained was 50 miles we wouldn't have to bleed for on foot. The night before we left, I walked the tower alone. My boots echoed down the stairwell, that same hollow sound I'd heard every day for 2 months on my own. In the observation deck, I stopped. Below me, O'Hare lay silent, runway stretching into the dusk, aircraft skeletons rusting at their gates, jet bridges hanging useless in the air. God, I'd memorized every shadow out there, learned the difference between wind-scraping chain link and something dragging itself across concrete. This place had been my entire universe. Leaving it felt like cutting off a limb, even if that limb had always been shackled. At dawn, we loaded the truck without speaking. The air smelled of oil, rust, and cold metal. The engine fought us at first, coughed, spluttered, then settled into a rough growl. We pulled away before doubt had the chance to catch up. I glanced back once at the glass dome of the control room high above. It looked smaller than I remembered, fragile even, like it might collapse the moment we were out of sight. The road circling the airport was cracked and overgrown. Weeds split the asphalt. Stripped cars lined the edges, windows opaque with grime. The truck rattled violently over potholes, but it kept moving. Beyond the perimeter fence, Chicago opened into industrial sprawl. Warehouses, empty highways, skeletal overpasses. Oh, the silence was even heavier here, pressed between concrete and steel. We stuck to side roads, weaving through warehouse districts where chain-link fences sagged and loading docks gaped like broken jaws. I kept the shotgun across my lap, the finger resting near the trigger guard. Harris drove with both hands locked tight on the wheel, his eyes flicking to every alley and rooftop. The infected were out there. We could feel it. But the zones near O'Hare had been stripped bare long ago. What unsettled me more were the signs of people. Burned-out campfires tucked against brick walls, a bicycle picked clean, lying twisted in the street, black spray paint across a warehouse door. Turn back. It was fresh enough that the paint hadn't fully faded. We stopped in a small industrial part to let the engine cool and double-check the route. The quiet wrapped around us as we shared a can of beans, eating straight from it with a bent spoon. In another life, it would have tasted like punishment. Now it was just fuel. Harris stared at the skyline in the distance, the towers of downtown Chicago rising dark against the haze. Whatever waited for us in there, salvation or a grave, we were already on the road to meet it. Oh, closer than I thought, Harris muttered from behind the wheel, and then he exhaled slowly. That's worse. More bodies, more of them packed in tight. He didn't have to explain. Downtown meant density, streets stacked with steel and glass, no room to breathe, nowhere to run. Well, we kept moving. For the first few miles, the truck earned its keep, chewing up cracked asphalt and spitting us further from O'Hare with every shuddering bounce. But by midday, Chicago reminded us who was in charge. The overpass ahead had folded in on itself like wet cardboard. Rusted cars were tangled in a heap beneath it, fused together by time and fire. No squeezing through, no clearing it without heavy machinery that we didn't have. Harris swore under his breath. We rolled the truck into the shadow of an overgrown service station, ivy swallowing the pumps, windows blown out and dark. He killed the engine. Well, without the growl of the motor, every sound sharpened. The distant caw of a crow, wind dragging through weeds, something metallic clinking somewhere unseen. Chicago wasn't dead. Instead, it felt like it was listening. We packed up without speaking. Every strap tightened, every buckle checked twice. Harris took the crowbar. I slung the shotgun and kept it ready. The air tasted like dust and stale gasoline, the kind of smell that clings to abandoned places long after the people are gone. Past the station, the road dipped into a residential grid. Block after block of houses stood frozen in place, windows dark and hollow. My stomach tightened. Now, warehouses were one thing, big, open, and predictable. But neighborhoods were different. Tight corners, blind fences, basements, and attics full of shadows. As we stepped off the main road and onto the first quiet street, something inside me snapped. The last thin line connected me to the safety of the tower. There would be no easy retreat now. Every step pulled us deeper into Chicago's ribs. Harris walked a few paces ahead, his shoulders high, scanning porches and roof lines. I followed close, the shotgun at the ready, ears straining for the sound I dreaded the most, the dragging shuffle that didn't match the wind. For the first time in a long while, I was beyond the perimeter of my world, and I couldn't tell if we were moving toward survival or walking straight into our own obituary. The street sloped downward, lined with houses that might once have been ordinary. Brick fronts, trimmed lawns, kids' bikes in driveways. Now they carried the weight of everything that had gone wrong. Grass stood so high, the porches sagged, cars were half buried in ivy and neglect. Some front doors hung open as if families had run mid-breath. Others were barricaded from the inside with couches and dressers jammed against the frame. Not everyone had escaped. Now, every window felt like an eye socket, empty and watching. Harry slowed near a driveway and crouched down. I followed his gaze. A chalk drawing clung stubbornly to the concrete, bright blue and yellow, smeared by rain but still legible. Safe here. The letters were uneven, childlike. My chest tightened in a way I wasn't prepared for. The message sat there like a fossil, proof that hope had existed once. Harris didn't say a word. He just shook his head once and stood. We moved on. The deeper we went, the tighter it felt. Oh, that tower had spoiled me with distance and visibility. From up there, I could see threats forming long before they reached me. Here, fences and hedges forced us into narrow corridors. Driveways turned into choke points. Alleyways swallowed sound and spat it back in a warped way. A broken screen door banged somewhere nearby, and I almost fired on instinct. I tightened my grip on the shotgun, the wooden stock worn smooth beneath my palm. We found the first body before noon. It was slumped against a curb, sun-bleached and brittle, clothes shredded by weather and time. Whoever they'd been, they were long past danger. No movement, no threat. But still, it stopped me cold. Up in the tower, the past had blurred into quiet memory. Out here, it lay right at our feet, rotting proof of how fast the world had folded. We cut through backyards whenever we could, trading speed for concealment. It slowed us down, but it kept us out of the open. Harris moved with the ease of someone who'd done this before, stepping lightly, checking corners, using fences as cover. But then he froze. One hand went up, and I stopped mid-step, heart hammering in my throat. He pointed toward a house across the street. The front door swung lazily in the breeze, the hinges whining. But that wasn't what had caught his attention. From inside came a faint scrape. Something dragging across wooden floorboards. We dropped low behind a hedge, thorns pressing into my arms, and we waited. There it was again. A shuffle, uneven, followed by a dull thump. Harris leaned in close, his voice barely air. One inside, maybe two. He sounded steady, but his jaw was tight. We didn't need whatever was in that house. Didn't need supplies badly enough to justify it. The problem wasn't the building, though. It was the noise. In neighborhoods like this, sound traveled in strange ways, bouncing off brick, slipping down alleys, curling around corners. It called things in. If whatever was inside kept moving, kept scraping and knocking, it wouldn't stay alone for long. I held the shotgun level, sight fixed on the doorway, while Harris mounted the porch with the crowbar gripped tight in his fist. The boards groaned under his weight, old wood announcing every step whether we liked it or not. There was no way to move quietly on a Chicago porch that hadn't seen care in a long time. He edged the door open with a steel bar. The sound inside sharpened. Something wet and off balance shifting across hard wood. Nails dragging, a slow, ugly rhythm. And then the smell rolled out. Damp rot and sour air, mildew soaked into drywall, the heavy sweetness of decay. It poured from the dark hallway and wrapped around us. And the thing appeared piece by piece. First a shoulder, twisted at the wrong angle, then a head lolling forward, skin matte with pale scars and dried sores. His limbs moved like they'd forgotten how joints were supposed to work. Eyes filmed over, unfocused, until they weren't. Then they fixed on Harris with a raw animal hunger. I staggered closer, the jaw working open and shut in a sick mechanical chew. Teeth clicked together loud enough to carry in the stillness of the block. But Harris didn't step back. He waited until it filled the doorway and then swung. The crowbar arced up hard and fast. Steel met skull with a crack that snapped down the street like a gunshot off the lake. The body folded instantly, collapsing across the threshold in a slack heap. But I didn't lower the shotgun. I swept the street instead, porches, windows, the gaps between parked cars swallowed by weeds. I listened for answering movement, for that chain reaction sound. Nothing. Just leaves scraping pavement and a crow somewhere above us complaining about the interruption. We hauled the body inside and shut the door fast. The house was dim, the curtains drawn tight. Furniture had been overturned and never set right. Dust coated everything in a thick grey film. On the dining table sat a board game mid-play, pieces scattered like someone had stood up in a hurry and never come back. "Family place," Harris muttered. "They didn't make it." His voice stayed flat, but the weight of it hung between us. This block, the next one, half of Chicago probably looked just like this. Rooms frozen mid-conversation, mid-argument, mid-life. We searched quickly. Cabinets, closets. Basement door locked but undisturbed. We turned up a few cans of soup, dusty box of matches, nothing worth dying for. By the time we stepped back outside, the sun had started to drop behind the skyline. The shadows stretched long across lawns gone wild. Night travel in neighborhoods like this was suicide. Too many blind angles, too many places to hide. Yes, we needed a place to hole up. Harris pointed out a 2-story brick house halfway down the block. Windows intact. Heavy front door, less exposed than the others. We cleared it slowly room by room. Kitchen first, then living room, upstairs bedrooms, closets, bathroom. No movement, no bodies, just silence and stale air. Not perfect, but defensible. We set up in the living room with the lantern turned low, light barely licking the corners. The walls were lined with photographs, smiling faces behind glass, kids in school uniforms, a couple hugging with navy pier stretched behind them, Ferris wheel frozen bright in the background. Ordinary Chicago lives, birthdays, bills, arguments over nothing, dinner on the table, laughter in the kitchen. Now their house was a shell, and we were the ones squatting in it. Sleep didn't come easy. Every creak in the floorboard sounded like weight shifting. Wind pushing down the chimney felt like breath against the back of my neck. Harris dozed lightly, crowbar within reach, boot still on. I stayed awake longer, a shotgun across my lap, staring into the dim hallway and listening to the city settle. I wondered if leaving the tower had been courage, or stupidity dressed up as momentum. Out there beyond this block, Chicago waited, wide and silent, full of corners we hadn't turned yet. But under the fear, something else moved. A pull. I hadn't felt it in these long months, certainly not while sitting above a dead airport watching runways bleach in the sun. Moving forward, even into danger, felt better than rotting in place. For the first time since everything collapsed, I had the uneasy sense that the story wasn't over. Not yet, at least. Well, my dear friends, there he is. Spring is in the air, and Mr. Kitten is very, very uppity at the moment. I tried to make sure you didn't hear him too much during the story, but it was pretty much unavoidable. Yes, he would not shut up today. Mr. Kid, what are you doing? Oh, mate. All right, hang on. All right, there you go. There you go. He just wanted to get out of the door there, so I had to stop this for another few seconds. Oh, don't know how many times I had to pause the recording today. Anyway, he's a lovely guy. He's going to be 14 this year. Getting on a bit, so, I'm just happy he's still around. Anyway, that's it. Another episode in the Zombie Outbreak series. Hope you enjoyed that one. Well, where next? Anyway, any ideas? I think the author will be open to any suggestions of where to go next, for those of you who want to offer a suggestion, obviously. Okay, this is a long and tortuous day of recording, so I'm not making any sense at all, so I'm going to shut up now. Till the next time, my dear friends, remember it's just a story, and you sleep well, yeah? Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.